Happy Tuesday, everybody. It's just 10 days till Christmas, and we are now into week 3 of the Advent series as we are working through the lectionary text for this year, which is year B of the lectionary cycle. So over the years, I've been in churches or Bible studies that have had a testimony time. And maybe you've been a part of something like that too. And what I've noticed is in these testimonies, there are what I would call some good testimonies, but also some not so good testimonies. So what is a not so good testimony? And without sounding too overly judgy, there are just some people who have a way of using this as an opportunity for talking about themselves and kind of indirectly patting themselves on the back. And so when the person's testimony has a lot to say about themselves and how great they are, but not a whole lot about Jesus, I would call that a not so good testimony. But of course, there are also some very good testimonies. So what does a good testimony look like? Well, I believe this passage from John, which is the gospel lectionary text for this week, shows us very clearly the components of a good testimony. It shows us what to include and what to avoid. It shows us the care we must take to not make it about us and be cautious even when briefly we come into the picture. The idea of a good testimony should be to maximize the focus on Jesus and not on ourselves. And so if you want to see an example of a good testimony, we don't have to look any further than this gospel reading today, which is John chapter 1, verses 6 through 8 as an introduction, and then 19 through 28 as the bulk of the text. And so let me read that for us, and then we'll break it down a little bit today, okay? There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. This is the testimony given by John when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" He confessed and did not deny it, but confessed, "I am not the Messiah." And they asked him, "What then, are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" He answered, "No." Then they said to him, "Who are you? Let us have an answer for those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?" He said, "I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, 'Make straight the way of the Lord,' as the prophet Isaiah said." Now they had been sent from the Pharisees, and they asked him, "Why then are you baptizing if you are neither the Messiah, nor Elijah, nor the prophet?" And John answered them, "I baptize with water. Among you stands one whom you do not know, the one who is coming after me. I am not worthy to untie the thong of his sandal." This took place in Bethany, across the Jordan, where John was baptizing. And so, notice in this passage, verse 19, this is the testimony given by John when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" And so John has then answered a series of 5 questions pertaining to who he is, and this is his testimony. And the way he answers these questions is a great witness for us in regard to testimonies. And so let's go through each of those questions and John's responses to them. And so the first question he was asked, a pretty simple one, who are you? Who are you? And so a little backstory for context. John was out there getting a lot of attention in the wilderness, out there along the Jordan River, and people were going out to him from all over the place. He was drawing this steady stream of visitors, including a lot from Jerusalem, and it was causing a really big stir, and this got the attention of the Jewish ruling council, which is sometimes called the Sanhedrin. And those were the movers and shakers, the power people of the religion in the nation of Israel. And so these folks sent out an investigating party to look into this guy. And they send some priests and Levites, people that were associated with the temple in Jerusalem. Now remember this, John's father Zechariah was a priest who had been at the temple. And so here's his son, a pastor's kid, if you will, causing all this commotion. And so they asked John, "Who are you?" Literally translated from the Greek, it would be like something like, "You, who are you?" Putting the emphasis on the you and putting him on the spot. And John answers them literally and emphatically, "I am not the Christ." So they ask him who he is, and he answers with who he isn't. "I am not the Christ." which is kind of interesting because they hadn't even mentioned the Christ. But John does. John had been out there preaching a powerful message of repentance, calling the nation to repentance. He was preaching end-time judgment and salvation. And so, therefore, thoughts of the Christ, the Messiah, the end-time deliverer that was promised by God from long ago, these thoughts might have crossed people's mind. It was sort of been maybe in the air, so to speak. And so just to be absolutely clear and to shut any of that conversation down, he says, no, I am not him, but somebody else is. I mean, that's the implication. The Christ is nearby. He's right at hand. He is the coming one, and he is coming right away. And so on to the second question. They asked him, what then? Are you Elijah? And he says, I am not. So why would they have asked him if he was Elijah? Well, the Jewish people had a belief about the coming of Christ that there was to be an appearance or reappearance, maybe I should say, of certain Old Testament figures. And one of them was Elijah, who was a prophet from hundreds of years earlier. And the story is that he had been taken up into the heaven on a chariot of fire. And so they had this expectation that Elijah would reappear shortly before their arrival of Messiah. In fact, there was a prophecy in Malachi where the Lord actually says that. Behold, I will send you Elijah, the prophet, from the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. And so, in a sense, you could say that John actually sort of fulfills that Elijah prophecy. In fact, before his birth, the angel had told his father, Zechariah, that this child would go before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah. And so, actually, to be fair to those who might have been drawing those comparisons, seeing John the Baptist, the way he looked and the way his ministry, I mean, it really recalls Elijah. If you compare the two, the way he dressed, wearing a rough garment of camel's hair, this wild man preaching out there in the wilderness and so on. But John the Baptist knew who John the Baptist was and who he wasn't. And he was not Elijah reincarnated. And he didn't want to get caught up in that discussion and get them sidetracked on that topic. And so they ask him, are you Elijah? And he simply answers, I am not. And so they ask the third question, are you the prophet? And he again answers, no. And so who's the prophet? Well, the prophet's another of these figures from the Old Testament. In Deuteronomy, Moses tells the Israelites, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers, and you should listen to him. And so they had this expectation of a great Moses-like prophet that would come in the end times. He says no. And so the fourth question, they say, who are you? We need to give an answer to those who sent us. I mean, what do you say about yourself? And now he finally gives a more detailed answer. He said, I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord. And so at last, John tells us who he is, stating it positively. I am the voice of the one crying out in the wilderness. But even here, notice, John doesn't put much attention on himself. He identifies himself simply as a voice whose function is to tell people about someone else. John is getting things ready for the arrival of someone, and that someone is Jesus. And that's who John wants to talk about. He doesn't want to talk about himself. He wants to talk about Jesus. Which brings us then to the fifth and final question and answer that they ask him. They said, well, then why are you baptizing? If you're neither the Christ, nor Elijah, nor the prophet, why are you doing this? And John answers them, I baptize with water, but among you stands one you do not know, even he who comes after me, the strap of whose sandal I am worthy to untie. And so this is the question of authority. John, what gives you the authority? What right do you have to be doing what you're doing? Who do you think you are, calling us to repentance, baptizing people, claiming some authority from God? And so John points again to one greater than himself, the one who gives him power to do his baptism. Among you one stands who even comes after me, the strap of whose sandal I am worthy to untie. And so in a way, John kind of turns this question around because his questioners were the one who were supposed to know these things. I mean, they were supposed to be the religious experts, yet they didn't know. They didn't recognize, nor would they later on, the very Messiah sent from God. And so in closing today, in John the Baptist, we see the example of someone who knows who he was and who he wasn't and gives an incredible testimony, one that points to the Christ. And that is a good example for us all. Because like John, God commissions us to bear witness to the Messiah, Jesus Christ, the one who has come in the flesh, the one who is here with us, and the one who will come again in his reign as Lord of all. And in this, there is no greater witness to the truth of God's work of salvation. All right, so that does it for today. On Thursday, we will be looking at Psalm 126. But until then, keep bearing witness to the light. Keep bringing the hope, and we'll see you then. God bless you.